I have with me today the wonderful Dr. Robin Dodson from Silent Springs Institute from Boston, Massachusetts. And we're gonna chat it up. Before we do that, just some reminders. What questions do you have? And after you hear her background, you should have some questions, I promise. So Robin, without further ado, go ahead and introduce yourself to the good people on the line for today, and then we'll kind of jump into discussion about what we just saw.
Great, thank you, Dede. So hi everyone, my name is Robin Dodson. I'm an environmental exposure scientist at Silent Spring Institute. We're a small nonprofit research organization that studies the links between the environment and women's health, with a particular focus on breast cancer. And my role at Silent Spring as an exposure scientist is to do research that is looking at what chemicals we're exposed to in our everyday lives. And many of these chemicals are coming from the consumer products that we use every day. So I think about how to measure them. I think about these different chemicals, and I also develop strategies to help us reduce our exposure to many of these chemicals.
Excellent.
And I should say, just a plug is that Silent Spring, actually, the middle app that they promoted there in the clip, Detox Me, that is from Silent Spring. So we have over 270 tips in there to help you reduce your exposures.
There you go. Let's start from there. How do we reduce our exposures? So do we throw away all of our products? Like, do I need to go into my kitchen, to my kitchen sink and, my bathroom and just start throwing away all of my products? Or what do you think? Like, what did you do when you first started learning about all of this information? So let's humanize it, right? So
sure.
Tell us about what you did, because you study this on a day-to-day basis. So you have a laundry list of knowledge than the average individual. So what did you do when you first started learning about chemicals in your personal care products?
Yeah, I mean, I get this question a lot. And I think, first of all, I want to say is one thing that I really liked about this series is that it did touch on kind of the climate impact and the environmental impact of many of these decisions that we make around our personal care product use. So one thing I want to say is you don't just like throw it all away and then, just think about kind of all that disposal at once, but rather, I like to think about kind of making informed decisions when I need to, right? So the next time you go and have a decision about which body lotion to purchase, to do that mindfully. So to, use one of the resources that's provided and to look to see if there are recommended body lotions that have fewer of these chemicals of concern. But the other thing, so it's not only choosing the products to avoid certain chemicals, but also generally using less products. Because, right, we know from product testing studies, and we've done them as well, that we can detect these chemicals, lots of these chemicals, in many of the products. So what that means is that, like, you can detect, a phthalate in one product that you use, but likely you're detecting that same phthalate in multiple products that you use. So every product matters, right? So these exposures can add up. So really, I think it's not only making informed decisions to avoid chemical exposures, but it's also trying to keep things simpler. It's to reduce overall product use loads. And actually studies, some of our studies have shown and some other studies have shown that, you can see a trend that the more products, the more things you slap on your body every day, the higher your exposures to many of these EDCs or endocrine disruptors.
So use less product.
Use less, definitely.
Be more intentional about the products that you're selecting.
Exactly. I mean, I think people often don't realize or don't kind of stop and think about the power that you have with your purse or with your wallet, right? Is that idea is that you as the consumer can use that wallet as your voice in terms of supporting the brands that clearly, kind of transparently show the ingredients and who are not trying to hide anything, right? So, put your money where your mouth is, or where you want your mouth to be.
Excellent. So we also know that not all of the products that are in a particular product are listed on the label. So for, the apps that were provided, so EWG, for example, and Clearia, they provide an opportunity for you to kind of get to know the products that are on the label, but not necessarily every single chemical within the bottle. So how do we, as consumers, from that perspective, how do we shop? So so let's talk about that, like the realities of how do I detox my life?
Yes, and Myra, the writing is so small, so it's hard to do anyway. So, yeah, so I mean, that's why it's kind of nice to think about using all these tools kind of in combination with each other, meaning, yes, you can, Clearia in particular, I think it's great. It flags these, it kind of gives you this flagging system about certain chemicals that might be on a product ingredient label. And that's a wonderful tool. And I would suggest that it could be used in combination with something where Detox Me, we took a different approach. We didn't want it to be based on a particular, ingredient label, because that's hard to keep up with, right? But rather we wanted to give you advice about when you're searching, or when you are shopping, for example, for a sunscreen, that you would look, instead of saying like, buy this sunscreen, rather the suggestion is to look for mineral-based sunscreen. So where the active ingredient is not a chemical like oxybenzones, but rather a mineral-based sunscreen that is non-nano. We found that kind of generally that allows people to make those decisions. You still have kind of control about if you like a certain brand or something like that, but it's not pigeonholing you into kind of one brand, one product, but rather like these are the considerations when you're standing there in the aisle, when you pick up that bottle, what you should be thinking about.
Excellent. So I'm going to jump into some of the questions that are coming through the chat. Since we have you here, that's the purpose for that. So are there any studies that you know of that show a link between EDCs, for example, and urine fibroids? Do you want to talk a little bit about
urine fibroids? Yeah. So there has been some evidence. It's particularly more of kind of lab-based studies that have shown kind of the plausibility that exposure to EDCs can increase the prevalence of uterine fibroids. The evidence, or the epidemiological evidence, is kind of harder, as it always is, right? The human-based studies is always harder to show, but there are several studies out there that are looking at that exact question, looking at the link between EDC exposures and uterine fibroids. Certainly, it's not only looking at the prevalence of fibroids itself, but also just kind of the characteristics of the fibroids, the morphology of it, and things like that. So yes, there is a link.
Excellent. So just want to level set a little bit. So there's information from laboratory experiments. So are we talking about cell lines and mouse models from that side?
Yeah, more like rodent studies and things like that. Okay. But I do think that there's also, just when we think about kind of the evidence that we need to kind of make these statements, right, you can think about the cell-based studies. So like if you think about it, there's certain kind of key characteristic cells or assays that might indicate an issue. And then we kind of build that up, right? And then you move into kind of an animal model, and then you move, you see if you can see that in humans.
Perfect. And I know one of your colleagues, Dr. Amizoda, does a lot of work in this area. So we'll be able to, she published the review was it last year or a couple of years ago, and we can send that to people that are interested specifically around the evidence related to chemicals in urine fibroids
exactly.
after the screening. So Sharkita, I hope I pronounced that correctly, we'll send you some additional information. All right, so let's keep it moving. This is good. So we have a question from Tia. For those of us that have already been diagnosed with breast cancer, in Tia's case, are they at greater risk by using these products post-treatment? Is there any evidence related to that research?
Yeah, I feel like that question should be, you should answer that, Dr. Teteh. But yeah, I think there is there are these concerns about, we know so let's kind of break it down, right? Is that we know that many of these chemicals, if they act like estrogen in our bodies, that means that they can act as kind of promoters of tumor. So this idea that oftentimes, right, women post-treatment or during treatment are told to kind of reduce exposure to other estrogens, right, like even soy-based products, things like that, right? So it's kind of only plausible and only kind of makes sense, right, that you would think about reducing your exposure to estrogens or chemicals that act like estrogen that can be found in products that we put on our body.
Yep. So I am, if you're interested in specifically about that topic, I'm just going to drop a plug that we do have a symposium coming up in September, focused specifically on breast cancer and EDC exposures. So I'm going to encourage folks to keep tuning in to what Bench to Community is doing, because one of our main focus groups is on breast cancer survivors and how do we help support you all in reducing your exposure to EDCs found in personal care products. So specifically Bench to Community, we're looking at this side of the story from the bench as well as the community perspective. So we are testing products, specifically parabens, which are preservatives found in a lot of your personal care products, on breast cancer cell lines in the laboratory as we speak. And again, Dr. Lindsay Trevino is the one that's leading those efforts. She will be doing a presentation during our symposium in September to give you some more context related to this topic area. Because unfortunately, the research from the laboratory's perspective is not focused entirely, it's not really focused on Black women. And we know that Black women carry the burden of the disease. So our group is filling in that gaps as it relates to that research. So we want to invite you to come back. And we'll keep it moving. Is it better to make our own skincare or just different products like body butter with essential oils and not fragrance oils? One of the things that I love about the Detox Me app, it actually provides alternatives for you to make your own products. So I just want you to kind of share with us some of, how did you guys come up with the different recipes to do those? How can people, download the app? If you haven't already downloaded the app, please download the app. It's very useful. Like anything from toothpaste to all the things, they provide alternatives for you to reduce your exposure. So Robin, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So, I think generally this is kind of going back to that, like keeping it simple, right? Like, so yeah, certainly kind of thinking about if there's any kind of natural oils or kind of more kind of homemade plant-based products that you can make. And yeah, one of our key things there is that they would be plant-based. So you're using things like, avocado oils and almond oils and things like that, cocoa butter, things like that, that rather than kind of any synthetic, say like lotion or things like that. I can drop a plug for where you'll find more about the app and kind of can download it from there. But yeah, we have a whole bunch of recipes in there. That was lots of fun in terms of like we bring them forth and kind of everybody kind of would like volunteer to try like rubbing banana in their hair in the shower and things like that. So most of them have been tested. But yeah, it's bringing the kitchen into your bathroom.
There you go. So they didn't just put the app out there without doing any tests. So
right.
They've done the work for you. So go ahead and check out some of those recipes that are on the Detox Me app that would support you in helping to reduce your exposures to some of your personal care products. So another question that we have, is there a detox protocol to follow when trying to make the shift and improve the long-term health effects from using these toxic products for years? So one of the things that kind of popped up for me when they said this was it took about 7 years for Mike to detox himself enough to produce enough sperm to be able to have a child. And I'm just kind of curious, like, do you know of any research related to how long does it take? What's the protocol? Like, again, so we want to minimize the number of products that we're using. We want to be more conscious about the products that we're selecting, but what's the other types of protocols that we have to take in order to reduce our exposures?
Yeah, so I was struck by that too, about how it took 7 years. And in fact, I have some really good news in that most of these chemicals, phthalates included, parabens that you mentioned, BPA, which was mentioned as well. All of those have what we call relatively short half-lives or biological half-lives, meaning they don't stick in our body for a long time. So it is not that Mike, that was his name, right? Mike needed to wait that long to kind of purge it out of his body. Oh no, that was actually 7 years likely for him to make all of the necessary behavior changes for him to reduce his levels, which is great because it means that, for example, you can make a decision today, tomorrow, and in 3 days' time, it matters, right? So you could choose a different body lotion starting tomorrow, and in 2-3 days' time, your levels will go down. And in fact, we can see that. I mean, there's been studies that have shown kind of how quickly this happens, not necessarily related to skincare, but we did an intervention study several years ago now where people switched to a plastic-free food that kind of never touched plastic packaging, a fresh food diet study. So food that did not come from cans, that never touched plastics. And people within 3 days could reduce their exposure to one particular phthalate, the most potent one, DHP, and BPA by more than 50% in 3 days. So that's the great news, is that it doesn't take a long time. The lag there is that the fact is that these chemicals are in a lot of things. So you have to, it's not just switching out your diet. It's like also switching out your personal care, also thinking about maybe some of the other choices, like what are some of the furnishings that you have in your home, things like that, all of that. Now, all of that matters and it all adds up, and which is great, but it's going to take a while to kind of, chip away, I guess, at all those behaviors or those sources that you might encounter every day.
I love that. So you mentioned a few things. Research has shown that if you were to change your behavior, just the usage of certain products with these chemicals in it, within 3 days, your levels of EDCs in your body will go down significantly. Yes? Yeah. So I know the Hermosa study has done it in Latina women. You've done it across the US population, or was it just Boston?
That was actually a California-based study that we did, the diet study.
You were quoting the Hermosa study?
No, actually, so the diet study was a Bay Area one. But yeah, Hermosa study is a really powerful one, and it involved, a bunch of teens just swapping out kind of their most commonly used personal care products. So, some cosmetics, but lotions, toothpaste, and deodorant, things like that. And yeah, they were able to see significant reductions.
So if the teenagers can do it, then we're going to encourage the adults on the line to kind of change reducing the number of reducing the number of products that you use, and then also being more conscious about the types of products that you're selecting does make a difference. Linda, I'll give you your money later because this is the perfect example to jump into the DMAC. So are there home kits available to check BPA levels? So I know that Silent Spring has a particular kit that I want you to tell the good people about. And then other products that could be helpful as well.
Yeah, of course. So I think, as I said, Silent Spring is responsible for the Detox Me app, which was in the film. So as part of that, and because over many, many years, we were having folks contact us to say, hey, the only way, what is in my body? I want to know, can I get that tested? And the only way that people get to do that is if they're part of some, health study somewhere. But how can a regular person like me know what's in my body? So we started what's called the Detox Me, after the app, action kit. So taking action from the app. And it is what we call a crowdsourced biomonitoring project. So it means that people are actually opting in and financially supporting, if they can, to have their urine tested for common consumer product chemicals, many of which were just listed. So parabens, BPA, things like that. And this Detox Me action kit, we started it. We were going to start it, and if it, it's crowdsourced. So if we're like, if we get 100, we'll do it. If we get 100 people submit. 750 people later, we have a kind of a thriving program on this urinary biomonitoring. So what it means is that we mail out a kit, people collect their own urines and send it back to us, and then we give a report that summarizes what we've found in your urine, and then also links to things, certain health concerns that may be associated with those chemical exposures. Also tips to reduce your exposure if you want, kind of resources to learn more, things like that. So the Detox Me Action Kit, we actually closed it out in the fall of 2019. Then the pandemic hit, and we just haven't opened it back up again. But we do have plans to open it back up again once we are can sustain that from an organizational perspective, because it's a lot to get hundreds of urine samples being sent to you. So, but we do hope to open that up soon, and actually probably a little bit of a twist to it to try to see if we can kind of further the research on how behaviors can influence our exposure. So consumer product behaviors can influence our exposure.
Excellent. So that was over 726 individuals that sent in their urine to get tested. Mm-hmm. And specifically you tested parabens, bisphenol A, analogs of bisphenol, so BPF, BPS, UV filters. So it was a comprehensive assessment of individuals' urine to see what exactly they are holding in their bodies.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where we've been able to find and kind of, with research backed kind of evidence of like fewer products means lower levels. We also found that people who did, if they said that they were reading product ingredients to try to avoid things like parabens. So, looking at the product saying, are parabens in here, which we know are typically labeled if they are there, that people who did that had significantly lower levels of parabens in their bodies. So, which is great. It means that works. And that is actually an action that a consumer can take. But, and there's always a kind of an asterisk to that, is that while people were able to significantly lower their levels by making different choices about the products, you cannot completely eliminate your exposures. And what that means to me is that there's a lot of other work we need to do. And they talked about that in the film. For example, Janet Noodleman, there's, kind of somebody who does a lot of work on the policy end of things, right? Is that we need better policies about why are these chemicals even allowed in the products to begin with, without, first being vetted for safety. So it really reinforces the individual can do a lot, and we should do what we can, but it shouldn't be totally up to us, that we need to kind of collectively act either in the marketplace or through policies and regulations to help us move away from using these EDCs.
Excellent. And that will lead me to my last plugin for today. We have shared with you all the Safer Beauty for All package and ways that you can be involved with that effort with breast cancer prevention partners. And so I'm going to have either Tia or Jasmine drop the link again in the chat. If you've already clicked on the link to add your name to the list so that this particular letter can go directly to your congressperson, feel free to do it again. It doesn't hurt for them to hear from you multiple times because they make note of it. And so I just want to encourage you all to, one, use your voice with your purse, so wherever you spend your money, and then two, also use your legislative power as an individual that votes as well in reaching out to your congresspersons. So with that, Robin, I'm going to have you say the last words. So what additional information do you think people need to walk away from as it relates to not just the film that we just saw, but the work that you're doing, et cetera? Like, what are some kind of like take-home messages that you have?
Bunch of them. I think it's like that we need a multi-pronged kind of approach to deal with this. There are things that we can do at the individual level, but things need to happen at multi-levels. So, engaging, as you had just kind of eloquently said, right, at multiple levels in the marketplace and with your legislators. I also, and something that didn't actually come up in this episode as much, and I was a little surprised, I took more of a climate justice, but an area that that we both share is this idea of kind of racial justice and environmental justice issues around that not everyone is equally exposed to these chemicals. In fact, we look at the national biomonitoring data, that's data measuring these chemicals in people's bodies, and we can see that there are, very much inequities in how people are exposed, particularly Black women having much higher levels of many of these consumer product chemicals, EDCs, in their bodies compared to other women. And that is an issue that I'm, very much dedicated to right now in a lot of my research projects.
Excellent. Well, ladies, I think I maybe have some gentlemen on here, but we just want to say again, thank you so much to Robin for being with us today. That was on point and valuable. So we're looking for practical ways of reducing our exposures, and with the information and resources that's been provided for you all today. So we'll just go over them really quickly. Use the applications to help support what your attempts to reduce your exposure. So we have the Detox Me app, we have Clearia, we have EWG. Use them to support your efforts in reducing your risk, reducing your environmental exposures from personal care products. Use less products than you normally will. So let's start using, some of those behavior change attitudes to reduce the number of products that we are using, and then being more conscious about the products that we are putting on our bodies and that of our family members. Again, it's a multi-pronged approach. And then lastly, use your voice with your wallet as well as from the legislative perspective. Let your congressperson know that this topic is important to you, that you care about the products that you use and the potential health impacts of some of the chemicals that we talked about today. And let us know if you have any questions. We'll be back again next week on Tuesday, not Monday, because Monday is Memorial Day. So again, on Tuesday, we will be back for the last episode of Not So Pretty, focused on hair care. So until then, see y'all later. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Erica, did you have a question?
Yeah, really quick. What would we do to take that test to find out what our levels are? Is there a test we could take?
Detox Me Action Kit. Unfortunately, it's not available just right now because we're still not open up again from the pandemic. But our website, we will announce it at silentspring.org when it is available. So check it out.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
And the link is in the chat, but we'll send it via email as well for you all to sign up for the listserv once it opens.
Great.
I have one question. Is there a list of the products that were more racial, drew the racial line? Like, what were the Caucasians using that the Blacks were not using? Is there something out there that tells us that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of research studies that have looked. So one is a project that I'm working on now. It's called Taking Stock, and we surveyed California women about the products that they use, and we can see differences by race and ethnicity across multiple products. So we find that Black women tend to use more hair products and certain types of hair products, that Latinas tend to use more cosmetics, and that white women use more things like sunscreen and tampons.
Okay.
All right, I'm just looking through the chat. Are there any other questions that folks want to ask before we stop the recording? No, Erica still has her hand up. All right, folks, that'll call it. Thank you and have a great evening.